Welcome to a video about creating a recipe or sub-recipe in Foodworks Online Nutrition Labeling. You can create recipes and sub-recipes in Nutrition Labelling Workspaces, which you have access to with a Nutrition Labelling or Duo subscription, or if you are completing a free trial. In this video, I will discuss how to create a recipe or sub-recipe, complete the fields on the General tab, use the navigation pane, enter recipe ingredients, enter the number of serves and yield, enter a method, use the overrides tab, enter common measures, view the nutrient analysis and label, and generate a report for a recipe. It is important to begin by stating that a recipe and sub-recipe are an identical resource type, but with different names and purposes. A sub-recipe should be used for your in-house recipes that you then use as ingredients in final recipes, whereas a recipe is for your final product for which you are producing nutrition labels. For this video, I will be creating a soup recipe from raw materials that were previously created in an example workspace. To create a new recipe or sub-recipe in an open nutrition labeling workspace, click the plus icon in the navigation pane and select sub-recipe or recipe from the drop-down. My recipe is a final recipe for which I want to generate a label, so I will select recipe. On the General tab, enter a name for the recipe. Note that this is not necessarily the name of the recipe as it will appear on your label, as you can enter an alternative name later when designing your label if you wish. I will enter spicy tomato and lentil soup, and you will see this update in the navigation pane. This resource is currently in a draft version, and any information I enter will be automatically saved. A draft resource is indicated with a small purple circle next to its name and icon in the navigation pane. A resource will remain a draft until you either choose to publish or delete it. Note that once a resource is published, you can still make edits as required. When creating a sub-recipe or recipe, we typically recommend clicking each of its tabs in turn and working through the fields top to bottom. That way you can ensure all the information is complete for your recipe. Let's start with completing the information on the General tab. We have already entered a name for our recipe. The next field is the tag field, which is an optional field. A resource tag is a user-defined label that you can create and apply to any resource within the workspace. Tags are color-coded and can be used to filter your resources in the navigation pane. Using tags is a very helpful way to organize your recipes, and we recommend using tags, especially if you expect to have many recipes in your workspace or work with multiple customers. To create and apply a new tag, click the Add Tag button, then select Create Tag. I will name this tag Customer 1 and select yellow for the color. This new tag is now available in the workspace and can be applied to other resources. The next fields are the ID1 and ID2 fields, which are also optional fields. These fields can be useful for organizing your recipes as they are searchable terms in the navigation pane and in the Ingredients tab of sub-recipes and recipes. An example of an ID you may wish to enter is if you are creating a recipe provided to you from an external supplier and there is an ID associated with the document that was provided to you. As an example, I will write the IDs 123 and ABC in these fields. Now that there is a tag and an ID associated with this recipe, I will show you how these can be useful in the navigation pane. First, you can choose to show tags and IDs in the navigation pane by selecting the ellipsis icon and clicking Show Tags and Show IDs. To remove the tags and IDs from the navigation pane, simply select the ellipsis icon and unselect the checkboxes. To filter the navigation pane with a tag, click Apply Filters and select a tag. I will select Customer 1, and you can now see that only the recipe with that tag is shown. I will remove this filter for now. You can also use the search field to search for a resource by its name or the ID of published resources. Now let's go back to the General tab of the recipe. The next field is the label declaration field. By default, sub-recipe or recipe is selected for you. The label declaration is used to determine how a sub-recipe or recipe is declared in the ingredient statement on the nutrition label. The type of label declaration you select will impact the ingredient statement of either the recipe you are creating at present or a recipe that uses this recipe as an ingredient. I will leave the declaration type as sub-recipe or recipe for my recipe today, but I will discuss the other declaration types. Firstly, you can declare your recipe or sub-recipe as a compound ingredient. A compound ingredient itself has 2 or more ingredients and appears within a label's ingredient list as its declaration name followed by its own ingredient list in brackets. When declaring a recipe or sub-recipe as a compound ingredient, you can provide its ingredient list for use on labels by either entering your own ingredient statement or by letting Foodworks generate the ingredient list using the recipes or sub-recipes ingredients. To declare a recipe or sub-recipe as a compound ingredient with an ingredient statement that you enter yourself, select Compound Ingredient from Overrides from the Label Declaration field. You will then need to enter a declaration name for the recipe, which is the name as it will appear on the ingredient statement. Then, enter the statement for when this recipe or sub-recipe contributes more than 5% of the final recipe's weight. You will then need to select a statement for when the recipe or sub-recipe is less than 5% of the final recipe's weight. You can choose for this to be the same as the above statement, which is the default option, have no declaration, or an alternative declaration. If you select alternative declaration, you will then need to enter another ingredient statement in the field provided. Generally, when a compound ingredient contributes less than 5% of the ingoing weight of the final recipe, the compound ingredient statement does not need to be included in the final recipe's ingredients list. However, if the compound ingredient contains an additive or an allergen, these must be declared no matter how small the amount. The easiest way to ensure compliance is to choose the same as above option. To declare a recipe or sub-recipe as a compound ingredient using the ingredients in the recipe, select Compound Ingredient from Ingredients in the Label Declaration field. The ingredients statement will then be generated by Foodworks and you just need to enter a declaration name. There are 4 other declaration types you can select, including additive, which you will need to enter a class name and additive code for, processing aid, which will not be shown on the nutrition label for the final recipe unless it contains an allergen, inedible component, which will not be shown on the nutrition label for the final recipe, or a reconstituted ingredient, which is an ingredient that is reconstituted with water when used. For more information about declaring recipes as reconstituted ingredients, please see our support article listed in the video notes and at the bottom of this support article in the related articles section. Also note that throughout Foodworks Online, there are information icons that you can hover over to read more about the field or feature in the app, and there are commonly links to specific food standards or websites for further assistance. For example, in the label declaration field, there are information icons for each type, which all have a bunch of helpful information to assist when selecting a label declaration. I would encourage you to use these information icons as you become familiar with Foodworks Online, or if you just need a quick reminder. I will change the declaration type for my recipe back to sub-recipe and recipe. Next, if you are using health star ratings on the label for this recipe, you will need to select the HSR or NSPC category. For information about each category, again, you can hover over the information icons for more details and click the supporting links if required. This will assist you in choosing the category that your recipe or sub-recipe should be assigned to. For my recipe, I will select Category 2. The final fields on the General tab are the description and notes fields, which are optional fields and the information is not searchable. These fields can be useful for documenting additional information about the recipe, but today I will leave these fields blank. You will also notice that an activity log exists on the General tab, which will record when the recipe is first published and any further changes made to the recipe, which is super helpful information to refer back to, especially if you are collaborating on a recipe with other users in your organization. After completing the General tab, you now need to enter the ingredients for the recipe on the Ingredients tab. The ingredients of your recipe will be the raw materials you have already created in your workspace. For an in-depth tutorial about creating raw materials, you can find the Create a Raw Material Overview video listed in the video notes and at the bottom of this support article. On the Ingredients tab, you can enter your ingredients as weights or percentages. By default, weight-based quantities are selected. However, if you would prefer to enter your ingredients as percentages, simply select percentage-based quantities instead. For more information about percentage-based quantities, please read the support article linked in the video show notes and in the related articles section at the bottom of this support article. I will be entering my ingredients as weight-based quantities, so I will toggle this back to the correct selection. Then to enter your ingredients, click the empty ingredient row and begin typing to search for your first ingredient by either entering its name or ID. To select an ingredient from the list, use the mouse to click the ingredient or use the arrow keys on your keyboard to highlight the ingredient and then press enter. I will select caramelized onion and enter 10 kilograms. If you wish, you can also make a note about your ingredient, but I will be leaving this blank. Then enter the rest of the ingredients for your recipe in the same way, which I will do now. I will also mention that you can group ingredients in your recipe into sections if necessary by clicking the Add Section button. This may be useful if you have a recipe with multiple sections, such as a pasta dish with a pasta section and a sauce section. Recipe sections are useful to organize your ingredients tab logically, and they do not impact the ingredient statement or any other label fields. You can also rename sections by clicking the section name and typing a new one, and you can rearrange them by clicking and dragging the icon next to the section name. I will delete this section for now. There are also many actions you can select from the ellipses drop-down of an ingredient row. For example, you can open the custom resource, which in this case is a raw material, copy, and then paste a row, move the row to a different section, highlight the row, delete the row, set retention factors, which are applied to an ingredient to adjust its level of vitamins, minerals, or alcohol as a result of the preparation and cooking process used. Keep in mind that if the amount of an ingredient in a recipe is very small, you may be able to ignore setting a retention factor for the ingredient. You can also create a new recipe using the selected row, multiply the ingredient quantity, divide the ingredient quantity, or convert it to a note row. I will remove these changes and return the recipe to its original state. Also note that standard practice is to create a recipe using already created raw materials in your workspace. However, you can also create a recipe and create raw materials along the way and then fill in the information for these raw materials later. To do this, in an empty ingredient row, you can type a new name of a raw material and select Create as Raw Material. You can then continue moving down and creating raw materials as you go, which will then appear in your navigation pane, and you can go back to the raw materials later and complete the information for the raw material, which will then flow through to your final recipe as long as all of the raw materials are in their published states. I will remove this raw material for now. After entering the ingredients, you then need to set the serves for your recipe. You can set the serves either as a number or as the weight of one serve. To do this, on the Ingredients tab, select either serves or serve weight and enter the value in the field provided. I will select serve weight and type 206 grams in the field. Additional serving information can be set later on using the Labeling tab. The next step is to set the yield. Setting the yield ensures an accurate analysis per 100 grams for a cooked recipe. You can set the yield using either a yield percentage or by entering the final weight of a cooked recipe. The calculation for yield is final weight divided by ingoing weight multiplied by 100. Therefore, you can either do this calculation manually and enter the yield percentage, or enter the final weight in grams and Foodworks will do the calculation for you. To enter the recipe's yield, on the Ingredients tab, select either yield percentage or final weight, then enter the number in the field provided. I will select yield percentage and type 95. Setting the yield adjusts the total weight, water, and alcohol values. In turn, this changes the concentration of other nutrients per 100 grams. After completing the information in the Ingredients tab, you can choose to add a method to your recipe by clicking Add Method. The text you enter in the method section does not affect the nutrition composition of the recipe or the food label. Today, I won't be entering a method section, so I will remove this by clicking the ellipsis icon and selecting Delete Section. The next tab is the Overrides tab. By default, the nutritional analyses for your recipe is calculated from the ingredient and yield information that has already been entered. On this tab, you can override this information if required. However, it is rare, so you can often skip the Overrides tab. In some cases, you may choose to override the calculated results for certain nutrients, or for country of origin, health star ratings, warning, advisory, or allergen statements. If you wish to override any information, simply type a new value in the Override column. Today, I will not be entering any information on this tab. The next tab is the Measures tab, where you can add your own common measures to your recipe, such as slice or bowl. This is mostly relevant if you are creating a sub-recipe and want to use a specific measure when entering the sub-recipe as an ingredient in a final recipe. You would then have the option to use the common measures you've created when entering the sub-recipe as an ingredient in a recipe. If you do not add common measures, you'll have the standard options available such as grams, kilograms, or serve. Typically, I would not create a common measure for a recipe. However, this could be done for a sub-recipe, so I will quickly show you how to do this. Firstly, I will click Add Measure and type a name for my common measure such as bowl, then enter the weight that a bowl of this recipe weighs. An optional note field is also provided next to the common measure, which I will leave blank. You could also select default measure, which means this common measure will be made as the default measure when this recipe is entered into other recipes. The default measure simply means it will appear first in the drop-down when entering the serve amount. If required, you can also copy measures from a similar food or recipe to base your common measures on. To do this, simply select Copy Measures and VCF and type the name of a similar food or recipe. On this tab, you can also enable volume measures for a recipe such as cup, milliliters, and liters, which is helpful if your recipe is a liquid. Then when you use this recipe as an ingredient in another resource, you can use volume measures to enter the quantity. To do this, you determine the volume conversion factor by entering how much a certain volume of the recipe weighs. For example, 100 milliliters of a liquid recipe may weigh 98 grams. If you also toggle on the liquid toggle, the analyses for the recipe are shown per 100 milliliters. After completing these 4 tabs, your recipe has now been created. It is also very important to check if you have any errors or warnings associated with your recipe. Error and warning statements will highlight if you have any missing information in your recipe or if some of the final values don't make sense. To access the error and warnings, you simply click the exclamation mark icon in the top right corner and they will be displayed. My recipe does not have any error or warning messages, but if I was to remove an allergen from one of my raw materials, publish this raw material, and then go back to the recipe, you will notice that a message appears stating that there is a missing allergen and I can select the raw material and go straight to where the problem lies and resolve it. After you have looked at any errors or warnings for your recipe, you can then be confident that the information on your label is accurate. Let's now discuss the nutrient analysis for this recipe, which can be seen on the analysis pane on the right-hand side. If it is collapsed, click the expander arrow to display it. In the analysis pane, you can view the analysis for the recipe as the total, per serve, per 100 grams, or enter a specific gram amount you wish to see the analysis for. By default, all of the nutrients and components enabled for this workspace are shown in the analysis pane. To expand and collapse specific sections in the analysis pane, click the arrow next to the title. If you want to see the analysis for specific ingredients in the recipe, simply select the checkboxes next to the name of one single ingredient or multiple ingredients, and the figures in the analysis pane will automatically update. When analyzing the nutrients in a resource, you can also focus on specific nutrients you are interested in, showing a breakdown by ingredient or section. To do this, on the Ingredients tab, click Edit Nutrient Columns and select up to 3 nutrients. I will select protein, fat, and carbohydrates. The Nutrient Focus column now appears on the Ingredients tab, showing the selected nutrient values for each ingredient in the recipe. If there were sections in your recipe too, you would see the total for each section as well. To edit the nutrients shown in the Nutrient Focus columns, click Edit Nutrient Columns and select and deselect nutrients as required. You can also select and deselect nutrients of interest by clicking the nutrients in the analysis pane. To show useful subsets of nutrients in the analysis pane, you can also create nutrient filters. Nutrient filters allow you to focus on the nutrients and components of interest to you without the need to disable the other nutrients in your workspace settings. You can apply the filter across your resources where relevant and remove the filter at any time when it's no longer needed. Any nutrient filter you create is available for all resources in the workspace. To create a nutrient filter, in the Analysis pane, select Apply Filters. Then, in the drop-down menu beside Nutrient Filter, click the plus icon. You then enter a name for the filter and select Nutrients of Interest. I will name it Example and select multiple nutrients and components. Then click Save Changes to apply it to the Apply Filters menu. Then click the nutrient filter from the Apply Filters menu to apply it. Now, in the Analysis pane, just the nutrients selected in the filter are shown. To edit or delete a nutrient filter, in the Analysis pane, click Apply Filters and select Edit to make necessary adjustments, or to delete the filter, select the Delete Filter icon. Another nutrient analysis feature you can use is to show sources of a particular nutrient. To use this feature, in the Analysis pane, click Sources. Then, in the Based On box, select the nutrient of interest, for example, protein. The ingredients that are a source of the nutrient are then listed in descending order of their contribution. On the Analysis pane, you can also click the Label tab to view the label for the recipe that updates in real time when you make any changes to the recipe. You can edit this label using the Labeling tab, which we will discuss in more depth in another video. The final functions in this video to discuss are generating a recipe report or duplicating, archiving, or deleting your recipe. Firstly, to generate a report, you need to finalize and publish your recipe and then click the ellipsis icon. Then you need to select Generate Recipe Report, and you can then modify the information that is included by manually deselecting and selecting specific checkboxes and clicking Update Preview. You can also choose to exclude or include page numbers and dates in the additional customization box. You can also duplicate your recipe by clicking the ellipsis icon and selecting Duplicate. You would then see a second resource in the navigation pane with the same name and copy added at the end. You can also click Archive to archive the recipe, which you can restore later on if required. Finally, you can delete a recipe by clicking Delete from the ellipses dropdown. A deleted resource is then not able to be recovered. This brings us to the end of the video about creating sub-recipes and recipes in Foodworks Online Nutrition Labeling. For more video resources, please click the thumbnail on this screen. Thank you for watching!